Gurmina Mahagat. Díomh go léir, fáilte roimh chuig an chomhrá seo. You're all very welcome here tonight for this kind of roundtable conversation about the Irish language and its place in the story, the history of Liverpool. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Ahern. I am a lecturer here in the Institute of Irish Studies, and I'll be chairing tonight's proceedings. To my right we have our speakers. Professor Pádraig O'Shiel is Emeritus Professor in Irish Studies at St. Mary's University in Nova Scotia. Dr. Dorothy Uigín is the Director of Irish Language Learning in Conchubhair Ghaeilge in the University of Galway, it's called now, isn't it? Yep. And Professor Brian O'Crohur is Professor of Irish Language and Literature at the University of Notre and the Director of Irish Language Studies there. So they'll be your speakers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in terms of their kind of research areas. We'll go through you one by one in this order. And I'll ask you to just say what's your kind of research area specifically with regard to the Irish language in Liverpool. So, Pádraig.
Hi, thanks, Owen. My name's Pádraig O'Shiel, originally from Derry, but I've spent 30-odd years teaching at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm an Irish language scholar, working at the moment on a book on Irish language discourse on the Afrikaans language and on apartheid in South Africa. Also working on a history of the Irish language and in Canada, the Irish language revival before the First World War. My connection kind of with the topic this evening is that much earlier, nearly 20 years ago by this stage, I published in Irish a biography of Pierce Paisley, Liverpool born, 1916 man, one of the founders of the Irish Volunteers in 1913, member of the first Dáil. He was on the pro-treaty side in the Civil War. He was also the original biographer of Michael Collins. But the best known reason as regards Paisley, kind of from my perspective, is that he was a well-known Irish language writer, a pioneer figure in Irish language theatre, a poet. It's a collection of poems, Baltinja Miligates Shejeg, May 1916, prison poems from his time in English prisons after the 1916 Rising. Also a journalist for many years, and an interesting figure, and very much a product of this city, though, as we'll see, had a rather ambivalent attitude towards his connection with Liverpool, but we'll tease that out as the evening goes on. So nice to be here.
Dorothy.
Well, I'm Dorothy Uigín, and the first thing I have to say is I wish I looked as young as I do in that picture. That was taken a long time ago. I teach in the University of Galway. I teach a lot of Irish language itself, but my main areas of research are the history of Irish language journalism and journals, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th century, the revival period. So I would be aware of Paisley's work at that time, but also I would be aware of the publications that Irish people who emigrated from Ireland published abroad in England and in America and in other places. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Hello, I'm Brian O'Crohur, Kerry man. I'm at the University of Notre. Why is that funny? I'm at the University of Notre Dame since 2002. I work on Irish language and literature from 19th to 20th century and contemporary literature fiction. My interest in Liverpool stems from my interest in intellectual history of the Irish language, the debates surrounding the discourse amongst the diaspora around the world.
Right. we'll start proceedings. I'll just ask a general question. This is open to anyone. What can we say about the story of Irish in Liverpool? What are our sources? Do we have the full story?
Everyone's looking at me. Liverpool is fascinating for a variety of reasons. The Irish have been coming here since time immemorial. They have spoken their language, they have brought their language with them. It's woven into the fabric of the city. The difficulty is, how do you tell that story, and what lens do you look at it through? Do you look at the extraordinary people, the great men, the great women? Do you look at the visual arts? Do you look at the newspapers? Do you look at print culture? Do you look at the history of the teaching of Irish in the universities? Do you look at ecclesiastical affairs and the Irish language? Do you look at prison records? Do you look at medical records? So what lens do you look at when you're trying to tell the story of the Irish language? And the great challenge is to find a continuous thread, rather than picking something out in the 1840s and then coming back in the 1940s. How do you tell a continuous story? And what we find is that we have the bits and pieces of a jigsaw, but we don't have the image, we don't have the cover of the box to try and put the jigsaw together. Liverpool, again, huge Irish population, huge Irish contribution to the culture of the city. And Liverpool, I believe I'm true in saying, is perhaps the only city in the world that has a standalone book dedicated to the history of the Irish language in the city. And that's because of Tony Birtle. And we're all drawing on his work and building off the incredible research he did and published 20, 30 years ago. Pádraig, you knew Tony Birtle, so maybe you'd...
Yeah, I think it's really important in locations such as this to recall Tony and how the way in which we are indebted to the work that he did in starting the process of documenting the story of the Irish language and Irish speakers in this city. I'd known Tony going back to when I was working on my Pierce Paisley book. My first visit to here to Liverpool was in early 1990s. I didn't know Tony at that stage, but I was starting to do research here in Liverpool. I'd also gone across the river, where the Paisley family lived for a time. But when I eventually met Tony, I was back here with him in 2004 to give a lecture down at the Central Library. And I was back here. We launched the Paisley book in the Irish Centre. I think at that stage it was still called St Michael's Irish Centre in 2008. And I had the privilege again coming back in 2016 for the commemoration, the centenary commemoration of the 1916 Rising, where I had the opportunity to talk about Pierce Paisley's role in the 1916 Rising. But Tony's work, Tony's so important for two main reasons. First of all, a personification of Irish-speaking Liverpool. That Tony learned the language, had a wonderful command of it, was writing in Irish, was spending time regularly every year over in Glencolumcille in Donegal. So in that sense, kind of an embodiment of the connection with earlier Irish speakers in the city. The second one is the fact that Tony is the one, through his book, this has been the second edition here, who we have forced others, historians in particular, who had chosen or for whatever reason had missed the presence of the Irish language and of Irish speakers in this city. And Tony is the one who is, through his work, means that they cannot do that anymore. Any history of the Irish in Liverpool has to introduce the question of the language and the languages that they spoke. And to that, and for that, we are indebted to Tony Birtle.
And Tony's book, of course, is a brilliant collection of different kinds of evidence, showing that in that kind of period of great Irish migration to the city, that there were Irish speakers. But, and I kind of asked this knowing that the answer is it's difficult. Do we have any idea of kind of what percentage of the Irish people coming to Liverpool would have been speaking Irish?
Yeah. Obviously, the arrival of the Irish in the city predates the Great Famine, but for many purposes, when we start looking at the modern history of Irish connection with Liverpool, inevitably you end up dealing with the 1840s. And as it relates to Liverpool, obviously an awful lot of Irish landed here. Many of them, no doubt the majority, didn't stay in the Liverpool area. So it was a staging point going on to other parts of Britain or heading off to the New World. But tens of thousands chose, for whatever reason, kind of to remain in the Liverpool area. And yes, when you're dealing with a language, the situation with Irish at the time, it was certainly not the language of a high status language in Ireland. It certainly was not a high status language when the Irish arrived in Merseyside. So it's difficult to give exact figures, but what you can use useful tools such as, where did the Liverpool Irish come from? What parts of Ireland can you identify as large kind of places or places that provide thousands of these? And I know from my own work when I was starting to look at Pierce Baisley and his experience learning Irish here, one group that he certainly was able to tap into in the Bootle area, people from Mayo, Irish speakers there. And clearly it's not the only area, but this sort of situation, looking at where did these people come from in Ireland? What was the language situation in those locations in Ireland at the time? And you can be pretty sure anybody who came from the west of Ireland, they were either monoglot Irish speakers or they were bilingual. So this is the sorts of things, sorts of tools that allows you to sort of in the absence of lots of other documentary evidence that you can draw on to get a sense of the picture.
Yeah, sorry, just that point about where they came from, and a lot of them came from Kerry as well to Liverpool, but the waters are somewhat muddied because we know that within the education system in Ireland, Irish was not allowed from 1831 when the national school system started here. So we do know that a lot of people were literate, but literate in English, and therefore when they self-declare, like, do you have reading or writing or what's your first language, many of them tended to be ashamed of having Irish, and because they had gone to school and had some literacy in English, a lot of them would claim that that they were English speakers. But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of the time the Irish language became the language of the home and sometimes in the workplace, but not really while dealing very much with the authorities or with, you had a couple of instances with the clergy where we know that, well, you can tell the story about the clergy. Yeah, I won't steal your thunder.
Well, no, it's Tony Birtle's thunder. 1842, 24,000 people signed a petition in Liverpool looking for Irish-speaking priests. Okay, we know they're corresponding with Rome, looking for Irish-speaking priests here in Liverpool. Part of the problem is that unless somebody transgresses, unless you come to the attention of the state, either in the court or in the media, you don't enter the record. And the place where we find Irish speakers most commonly before the famine is in courts, either as plaintiffs or defendants or as witnesses, where they're monoglots. And the newspaper reports that whoever it was in court, a translator was required. And this is matter of fact. There's nothing extraordinary. It's not a strange creature that beamed down from I almost said Wales, from Mars that didn't speak English. It's a recognised fact that monoglot Irish language speakers are part and parcel of everyday life in Europe, in Liverpool. And that translators are required, even though English is officially the language of the court. They recognise the need for translators, so you find people like Martin Flanagan being transported to New South Wales, 1847. Again, there's a faction fight in Albert Street and Northumberland Street in 1853, Catholics versus Protestants. There's a whole lot of people arrested, but the witnesses require translators. Okay, so again, the only reason they are in the public record is because they transgressed. They brought themselves, they went above the regular norm and entered the record. But for most people, we have no idea. People go home, they have conversations at night. There's no record of those day-to-day dull existences that people lived.
Just to make a connection there with, I suppose, what Dorothy was saying, the key point here, I think, is that if you spoke Irish and you were from a poorer background, if you were lucky enough to be illiterate, you'd be literate in English. So, as I understand it, we don't have much in the way of writing by these Irish speakers, is that?
Well, if you look at the journals, I mean, we do find an awful lot of Irish people writing in newspapers and journals because we had a very good education system, a national system from 1831, but it was generally in the English language, so they were illiterate, and the ones who maybe were slightly better off. Pierce Paisley's father was an editor in the Catholic Times here in England, and so they were literate in English and they were interested in writing, but there's very little in the Irish language to be found in any of the journals that they were involved with. So again, it gives and that's a story in itself, because it tells that story that maybe, even though they were native speakers, many of the Irish people here, that the people who were writing are involved in journalism, and a lot of them of Irish background wrote in English. Okay.
Do we have anything like letters written in Irish, or?
Very little, and similar story in America and other places where Irish people emigrated to, because very often the letters would be written in English, and we have situations where the local parish priest at home in Ireland would take the letter and read it for the family. If they weren't literate, the older people may not be literate, but certainly the children who went abroad would write home in English, and then they'd have to get someone to read the letters at home. But there's very little material, letters at all, in the Irish language. And the Irish language material that's in some of the journals, it's things that have to do with the Gaelic League. And the Gaelic League, in many ways, was more, it wasn't for the poorer people, really. I mean, a lot of the people who were involved in the Gaelic League were maybe slightly better off, and could afford to buy journals and to do things like that. So what you find in those journals, if there is any Irish, might be a language column where there's lessons, Ona Growney's or Ilog de Burke's lessons in Irish. That's the type of thing you find in this kind of late 19th century, early 20th century.
So that immediately suggests that the audience for that is people who are learning, people like, I suppose, Pierce Paisley.
Yeah,
Like
not the native speakers.
Not the native speakers, but people coming back to the language who maybe have the education and the time and so on.
It's Martin Luther's fault. If Martin Luther had been more successful, okay, and if Ireland had become largely Protestant, the Bible would have been available in Irish. People would have, like the Welsh and the Scots, read the Bible in their own language at home. They prayed and they wrote in Welsh or in Scots Gaelic, whereas the Irish didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part, but I mean, we were mentioning earlier on Douglas Hyde, founder of the Gaeilge League, married a woman from Liverpool, and he married in Liverpool. She was of German background, but he married her in October 1893, the year the Gaelic League was founded. So that's a nice little link with Liverpool. And he wasn't, sorry, my point was he was Methodist, he wasn't Catholic. So there are some people who weren't Catholic. Generally, we associate the Irish language with Catholic people, but there are some examples, and a great example that we were talking about earlier was Sive Trinchuk, or Seska Trench, who was born here, and she was a Protestant, but she was very much involved with the revival movement, but moved back to Dublin from Liverpool. Yeah.
And there's this passage in the Tony Birtle book about the survey in Vauxhall, the Vauxhall area, where there's quite a few Irish-speaking families, but not all Catholic. And
Yeah.
again, it's one of those things that as time moves on, the historians are beginning to query that cast iron connection between the Irish language and Catholicism. So if you look at the reports of the British Bible Society, the Irish Bible Society, the various proselytization groups, they're claiming to be very, very successful teaching people to read the Protestant Bible in Irish, either in the Roman font or the Gaelic font. If their numbers are only half true, there are still a lot of people learning to read.
Yeah, I think I picked up on Tony's point about the number of Protestant families Irish-speaking here in the middle part of the 19th century, because it actually plays into work that's been done on Irish and other diasporic communities. There's been work being done in Canada at the moment, again, which challenging the narrative of the historians who essentially had written the Irish language out of the story of the Irish in Canada. But one of the big tools that's become available is the 1901 census in Canada, that it was the first that asked the question about mother tongues, if still spoken. So there's been work done, for example, on locations in Montreal, St. Gabriel's Ward in Montreal, where based on the 1901 census, around about 500 people said that Irish was their first language. And the great thing about this census was that you're able to identify people who were born in the 1830s, 1840s, so you're able to cast back several generations as far back as the pre-famine. But 20% of the returns, those who self-identified as having Irish as their first language in this Montreal ward, were Irish Protestants. So again, there's a narrative there, which is, again, this perception of linking sort of Catholicism or Catholics being Irish-speaking. The evidence from places such as Liverpool, the evidence from Montreal, diasporic communities, a lot more complex than it's frequently presented.
Pádraig, can we bring it back to Pierce Paisley then? You mentioned him at the start, very important figure in 1916, and elected MP then in Kerry, of all places. What was his relationship to the city? How was he formed by the city? Or what?
So Paisley was born here in Liverpool in 1881. Actually, there is no birth certificate, which I was shocked at the time, but I've actually learned subsequently that's not really that unusual. But I have he's mentioned in the census from that year in reference to his christening, his baptism. So there's no doubt that he was born here in 1881. His family was, both parents were Irish born. His mother, Nanny Hickey, she actually had been married previously, and there's this reference, kind of suggestions of a whole life story that she has to tell. She was in Peru, and where the first husband seemed to have died, but she ends back up in Liverpool and marries Patrick Langford Paisley from County Kerry, Ahadu area in County Kerry, close to Killarney. And he had formerly been a clerical student in the Irish College in Rome. And one of his brothers was ordained, was a priest back in Kerry, but PL, he becomes the editor of the Catholic Times here in Liverpool. And he was the editor for close to 40 years. He was one of these characters who seemed to be constantly concerned that he was about to be fired the next day. But he ended up in the same job, as I say, for kind of for half a lifetime. So Pierce Paisley grew up in a family here in the Liverpool area, but also over to Wallasey. The family moved over when he was quite young, and he grew up here. He attended St. Francis Xavier College, the Jesuits as such, very much catering kind of for the middle class, lower middle class Irish Catholics here in the Liverpool area. But you get this strong sense of Pierce Paisley, first of all, real sense of Irishness. He knew who he was. And it always is one of the issues when I was kind of dealing with his writing the biography. He never wanted to acknowledge that he was born in England. So there are two passports of his amongst his papers in the National Library in Dublin. The first one was issued in March 1922 when he was part of a provisional government pro-treaty delegation going off to sell the Anglo-Irish Treaty to Irish Americans. And it was issued by the British government because they were still issuing the passports for Irish people at that stage. And it sort of gives place of birth, Liverpool, the year of birth, 1881. And there's another passport from it was issued in 1927 by the Free State government. Pierce Paisley, born 1884. Like, who doesn't lie about their... You either want to be older than you are, so you get into a pub or whatever, but you want to be younger or whatever for other reasons. But it gives a different date of birth, but also says born in Ireland. He was never willing to acknowledge his connection with England. But then when you sort of start kind of getting into a little bit more detail, I was sort of using it. Graduate students of mine a few years ago had two sort of favourite terms. One was to drill down, and the other was to unpack. And so when you drill down and unpack into Paisley, I'm probably mixing my metaphors there, you start seeing, for example, he also distinguished between Liverpool and Wallasey. And there's a quote of his, and this is this from his diary. So this is what he says: "I never much cared for my association with Liverpool, and always distinguished between it and the Wallasey district. Indeed, my dislike of Liverpool as a grim, ugly, smoky, no class, in inverted commas, place goes back to my earliest days when I looked with horror at being taken by my parents from the wide spaces, green fields, clean seashore of Egremont to the smoke, rush, and infernal noise of what seemed to me a kind of hell." Okay, to say he had an ambivalent relationship with his city, but I mean, so there's that sense when you start looking at kind of how he differentiates between the two sides of the Mersey. Class plays into this, no doubt about this. He comes from a lower sort of middle class family. But it's through, like we were talking about literacy earlier on. His father was the editor, as I said, of the Catholic Times. One of the features that opened up to him were passes from the theatres here in Liverpool. They go off and see plays. Exchanges with newspapers. So one of the exchanges that the Catholic Times had was with Irish Lore na Ghaeilge, the Gaelic journal. It was established in the 1880s. And talking about literacy, as Paisley was learning, he had access in Irish not just to lessons or beyond lessons about teach yourself lessons, reading stories, reading parts of the new literature, reading plays, reading sort of contemporary material. So it opened up a whole world for him. And as I say, his formative years, 24 years, living in Merseyside, and he never wanted to talk about it.
Earlier you drew a comparison between Paisley and Tony Birtle. As kind of two different sides of a
Yeah,
of a
yeah,
coin.
and I just sort of say this because one of the things that like, I live in Nova Scotia. I sort of raised two children through Irish. One of them turned 31 the other day, the other's 20. They still talk to me in Irish. I'm actually shocked that they still talk to me, but they actually still talk to me in Irish, okay? And that Brian's living in South Bend, Indiana. Both of us are Irish language scholars. We're outside Ireland. So trying to sort of look basically sort of as somebody as say learned Irish here, had choices, for example, could have chosen to remain in the Liverpool area, make a living as a journalist, just as his father did. But you get this tension within him that the only place to go to is Ireland. And again, without personalising it too much, just from my knowledge of Tony. Tony, of course, always had that connection with Donegal. But Tony chose to remain here. So again, these sorts of tensions amongst the diaspora, at whatever level, if you're interested in something like Irish, what's the end result of it? Is it to remain within your own community and to do what you can there? Or is it to go off to Ireland? Paisley chose to go to Ireland. Tony chose to remain here.
But do you think for Paisley it was because of the timing? I mean, it was a very interesting time to be in Ireland, you know, at the time of the Irish revival. And he was a literature man. He wrote literature. He was very involved with the whole literary movement. Yeah. So was it the timing as well?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely no doubt, like, of course, just the energy associated with not just the Irish language movement at the tail end of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, but you think about sort of sport and the GAA. You think about kind of the things like, and of course, basically kind of had a ambivalent relationship with the Abbey Theatre. He was arrested then at the premiere of Synge's Playboy of the Western World. For basically, this was the best career move that he ever made, being arrested, because subsequently, kind of, he was sworn into the ARB, based on kind of the fact that he had rioted or was arrested on the evidence, and that W.B. Yeats gave evidence against him in court in January 1907. But there's absolutely no doubt, yes, that the milieu, kind of the environment of the time, but what in his early years, as he was trying to make his way as a journalist, he goes to London, and he is gobsmacked by the sense kind of Irish activities that are there. And again, a lot of this goes back to kind of his interest in literature, whatever. He had people there from his perspective with whom he could discuss these things. And when he comes back, he talks again in his journal, and I won't give you the quote, but he uses this term, an Ireland in London. The sense that there was this network of all sorts of things through sport, again through the GAA, through Conradh na Ghaeilge, the Gaeilge League, literary societies, that this world of not just activity but ideas. And when he returns to Liverpool in 1901, he kind of dives into the Gaeilge League and sort of says to himself, I'm going to create an Ireland in Liverpool. But what happens is that 4 years later, he sort of admits, or for him, I can't sort of manage to get this world that I'm interested, his series of interests. And that's in a way kind of what propels him to make that choice to leave Merseyside and to go off living in Ireland.
I think it's true what you say about London. I mean, we know that the Gaelic League had many branches. There was but also literary groups. W.B. Yeats was in London. There was an awful lot going on in London. Newspapers as well. And Liam P. Uigín was one of the main people involved with the newspapers in London, but was also a writer on the Catholic Times. So we see again, the connections between the writers and the people who were slightly better off than the people who were working on the docks, in Liverpool. There's also, when you talk about journalists. Another famous journalist from Liverpool is Stephen McKenna. But I like what he said. Now, he did move to Dublin as well, like Pierce Paisley, but he worked as a journalist. He wrote on the Freeman's Journal, the Clive Sullish, and various others. But in a letter he wrote to a friend of his, "I read my Irish 5 to 10 pages, nearly all but every day. God knows why I don't let the Irish die in me, but I don't and I can't." So that was a person that, like Paisley, he was very committed to the Irish language. But as a journalist, Paisley was a journalist as well, but I think Stephen McKenna is the best example maybe of journalists who coming from Liverpool who used English and Irish in their journalism.
They're also, public intellectuals who are as comfortable in Latin, Greek, and French. But when we talk about them, the focus moves back to Ireland or to high literature, and it moves away from Liverpool and your regular person that goes home in the evening and for whom Irish is a first language, a heritage language, or a second language. And it's how to keep the focus on Liverpool without always going back to the Civil War, War of Independence, censorship, or Greek translations of Greek plays by McKenna.
And that's the nature of that's a problem with the historical evidence we have, right? These people are more or less invisible in the historical record.
If we focus on the written record, whereas if we move to folklore, if we move to anecdotal evidence, that's where we begin to unpeel the hidden history of the Irish in Liverpool.
And censuses and things like that, marriage records, that's where you really get maybe a deeper sense, because the literature coming out of Liverpool or the journalism coming out of Liverpool was mainly in the English language, and some of the great journalists moved to Dublin, the ones who were writing in the Irish language.
The two doctors deserve a mention, the Blythes that lived close to Reed's bookshop. I don't know which street that's on, but...
Around Mount Pleasant, yeah, that's right, yeah.
But it would appear that they were both fluent speakers of Irish and dealt regularly with patients and were happy to speak with patients in Irish. And that's something, when you combine that with the sermons in Irish, the confessions, you get a picture of a linguistic subculture in Liverpool that is as strong or stronger than you get anywhere else in the world.
And slightly opening a kind of can of worms here. What happened to all the Irish speakers in Liverpool?
Yeah, well, we were talking about this earlier, and I think they weren't documented in literature at all, very much. We only see kind of the Irish speakers being documented in literature maybe in the 1950s, and that was with Donald Macaulay, and he was in Northampton, so he wasn't in Liverpool. We don't have stories. We don't have those stories from the Irish speakers very much, but we can presume that, because they were in Liverpool and because English was the language that was used, and because they were literate in English, which was a benefit to them, that over the course of a couple of generations that Irish was not continued. There's some evidence in the university here that there was an Irish language, quite a strong Irish language university, Celtic Studies. Kuhnemeyer was here.
Probably the most famous Irish speaker in Liverpool was a German. But
yeah. But the everyday people, yeah.
You have that priest from Cork, O'Kellicher, and he, in 1909, 1910, he reports back that he's teaching 2 classes with 60 students in each class, one through English, the other through Irish. And you have to start wondering, where are those Irish speakers coming from, and what is he teaching them? Okay, so clearly there's a group of people in Liverpool who are, as part of the revival, want to retrieve Irish, or they are people who have Irish and want to engage with it as a social activity or want to learn to read and write with it as part of that revival movement. But what happened, to go back to your question, what happened these mono-Irish speakers? They died. But there's a wonderful account by John Kelleher. Kelleher was chair of Celtic at Harvard. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah,
So he talks about growing up as a child in New England and how in the Irish-American communities, these old steel towns, the mill towns on the Massachusetts, and on weekends, the old Irish people, the first generation, second generation, would gather. And as the young people left, the language would switch from English to Irish. But then bit by bit, they all began to die off until you just one old guy, the old unmarried uncle in the corner who really didn't speak much to anybody anymore because it wasn't his language. And there's that. In other countries, you get accounts of people ending up in lunatic asylums or in being indigent just because they don't have the language skills, they didn't adapt. And adaptability is a central skill if you're going to be an immigrant.
Can I just pick up, because one of the difficulties, again, the area I was focusing on, the end of the 19th century, the start of the 20th century, when Pierce basically started getting interested, as he started learning Irish by himself, and then when he comes to whatever, around 20 or so, he goes off to, inquires about where he'll find a Gaelic League branch here in Liverpool. And it so happened 1896 was when you get the first branch that was established here. It was known subsequently as Keough-Naughton Institute, John O'Donovan, but it was also known as the Edgehill branch. And that was the one where the Blythe brothers, the two doctors, or one doctor, I think the other was involved in municipal politics, maybe a doctor as well. But that's where basically it goes along kind of to start sort of being enrolled in formal lessons for the first time. And as he says himself, it wasn't too long before he ended up being kind of the teacher of the class. But one of the changes that comes during his time in Liverpool then, when he's involved with Conradh na Gaeilge, the Gaelic League, is that he's looking round at this Edgehill branch and he's saying, that's not where you find the native Irish speakers. And where he finds them is in the Bootle branch. And I've heard all the stuff about brutal and all this sort of stuff, and that you hear all these sort of things in the past. But this is where he sort of finds native Irish speakers, ones who were coming along to the local Conradh na Gaeilge branch. But it raises a bigger question, that you had this Irish language revivalist movement at the time, but how successful was it in actually reaching out to the numbers who had native speakers? Why would many of them want to come along to a class if you've been out working all day or whatever, raising family? There were some advantages, because for a lot of these people, while Irish was their first language, they couldn't read and write in it, so it was an opportunity to develop literacy skills in it. But nevertheless, you would have a situation where a lot of native speakers would have been reluctant to associate with the kind of a revivalist association. Like, what do you, and there could have been all sorts of reasons, from ones who sort of say, well, that's in the past, where our future, the future of our children is looking ahead in an English-speaking world. So you had all sorts of dynamics and tensions at play. But this sense of how successful was organisations such as Conradh na Gaeilge in bringing on board many of the native Irish speakers who were there. And the evidence is it's not particularly successful.
And nor were they in Ireland. I mean,
Yes.
if we're honest about it, at the time, it was middle and upper class people who were involved in the revival movement, for the vast majority of them.
Yeah, and that of course increases the difficulty of being able to document
Yeah.
the presence of Irish speakers for whom the language may then have been, if you like, the home language, or occasional situations, but not out in the public spheres.
On that note, and to begin to wrap up so that we have time for a Q&A afterwards, you mentioned that Tony's book really was such a step forward in kind of bringing the attention of historians to the fact that there was an Irish-speaking population in Liverpool, and kind of beginning this conversation. What work remains to be done in that area? What?
There is so much still to be done. And again, yes, you're always going to come up against these issues of being able to document. And but having said that, again, there are sources out there that allow you to kind of to start piecing together. Jigsaw is the term that Brian used earlier on. When I was doing my work on Paisley, we were barely into the era of the internet. Or not even mention this idea of a mobile sort of, or a phone, or being able to take photographs of stuff or whatever. The technology that now allows us to get access to material that was either not available or difficult to access, newspapers. For example, I barely used local newspapers when I was dealing with Paisley stuff. Probably the most I drew as regards local newspaper was the Catholic Times itself. But increasingly, this material has been digitized. It allows you to kind of get access to references, interpreters, court situations, quirky little stories that some newspaper person decided were kind of sort of an interest story, but also sort of census records, being able to cross-reference. There's a massive amount of work to be done in exploring the story of the Irish language in this community, as is the case with other diasporic Irish communities as well.
There's also the contribution of people born and raised in Liverpool have made going back to Ireland. So that Martin Standoon was exiled from Liverpool in 1939, goes to Ireland, gets arrested, he ends up in the Conradh camp, he meets Martin O'Kane, improves his Irish in O'Kane's classes, but then moves back to Spiddal and opens up possibly the most famous retail store, is that the right word? Or, shop, thank you. Shop.
Too long in America there?
Yeah.
We call it a shop in Ireland, yeah.
It's not a corner store, it's
Shop.
It's a gift shop.
It's a gift shop, maybe, yeah.
fashion, tweed coats and jackets.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. But they're now into the second, third generation. They're the Nick Vahuna woman who born and raised in Liverpool, who went back and got a job in Radio Gaeilge and was a reporter for numerous years.
Yeah,
And the short story writer, Gaeilge.
One of the most prolific contemporary Irish short story writers, Gavin O'Fachta, originally from Glasgow, lives in Belfast now, but he's published a collection of stories in Irish, went through University of Liverpool. It's kind of the contemporary connection is still there.
Between him and Paisley, there's a literary tradition.
Yeah. Sorry, no, I was just going to make one point, and I was agreeing with you about the newspapers. I think a lot of my study, when I started looking at the newspapers, I was looking what's in Irish, and probably missed those little hints in the English material, which were the court cases. So I agree with that. You know, I picked up a lot of it, but not as much as I could have. There are gaps, but you will get hints. You will be sent down little lanes where you'll get pieces of information that'll build the picture. That's the fun, yeah. And it'll create the jigsaw.
Last comment. You asked what happened to the Irish language speakers. Okay, they died, but their legacy is their influence on the vocabulary and the accent and the syntax
totally,
of Liverpool.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right, okay, we better wrap up. Can we have a round of applause, please, for our speakers? And we have a chance now for some questions from the audience. We have people coming around with mics, so please put your hand up. I'll point to you and you get a mic. Wait till you get a mic before asking your question, please. Greg.
Thanks, Eoghan. It's a comment more than a question, really. I'm Greg Query, and I was Tony's publisher. It was over 20 years ago when we published at a very low budget the pamphlet, which I think Brian referred to. And then in 2020, we got the book published. We were determined to bring it out. Tony was seriously ill at the time, and we were delighted that we got it published while he was still alive. But it was right in the opening months of COVID, so we had to do it on a Zoom. But I would like to endorse what Pádraig was saying in his earlier remarks. I don't know what the phrase you used, Pádraig, but Tony embodied the Liverpool Irish and what it is to be Liverpool Irish. But more importantly, the second point you made was that right from the outset, Tony was determined to address the way that the Liverpool story was told, the accepted version in local history, and he did manage, I think, to do that and to change the narrative so people could ever again sort of play down the important role that the Irish language played in it. And my question was going to be, well, but Owen, you asked it, is what future direction research might take, because I think it's very important that we build on the great work that Tony started.
Thank you for publishing it. Okay, without publishers, printers, we'd be nowhere. I've been photocopying it for years. I finally got to buy a copy for 40 sterling in the Blue Coat bookshop yesterday, so I'm delighted with myself.
€10.99 from Kenny's in Dublin.
No, excuse me, Kenny's are in Galway.
Galway, okay, right. I was too focused on the $10.99. It's okay.
Is there any plans to do another edition?
Yes, it's been reprinted twice. It was sold very well both here and in Ireland. And Tony's partner Grace has taken it round to the bookshops in Ireland.
Yeah.
In Galway. So we shortly expect to have to do a third print.
Okay, great.
Lovely.
And recommend we can get it in Waterstones in Liverpool or in use from Dover.
Okay. Yeah.
Buy it, give it to your friends. Give it next Christmas.
Yeah.
Morgan.
Hi, I was just wondering, to what extent do you think that the church had an impact on the Irish language sort of around the time we're saying? Like, obviously, there was some Catholic priest or Irish-speaking priests that came over and did masses in Irish, and I think it might have been the Church of England, I think it was actually, that gave the Gaelic League some spaces. But yeah, to what extent do you think that had an impact on the language at the time?
Yeah, in Ireland, I think Catholic emancipation was very detrimental to the Irish language. I can't say for certain about Liverpool, but I know in Ireland, because of the Irish colleges and because of the fear that the priests had, that Catholic emancipation was in 1831, and the colleges, the training colleges for priests came after that. But there was a fear amongst priests that if they used Irish, that they may be seen as disloyal to the crown. Now, if you know that, it's a difficult one to go in, but into. But Daniel O'Connell was the Catholic emancipator. He was also an MP in Westminster. He was a native Irish speaker, and I won't get the quote exactly correct, but he said, "I can witness without shedding a tear the demise of the Irish language." Blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the full quote.
The superior utility of the English tongue.
Exactly, the superior utility of the English tongue. So there was this fear. I always, you talk about Daniel O'Connell and his negative effect on the Irish language for that reason. And because of Catholic emancipation, and because of this feeling amongst priests that the Catholicism was more important than the language, as it was for Daniel O'Connell. I think certainly in Ireland it was very detrimental. Catholic emancipation was very detrimental to the language, so it was. Liverpool, I'm not sure, I couldn't give definitive answer there, but I mean, you did reference it, the petition where they did need an Irish-speaking priest.
I'll defer to the Ulsterman.
One of the things, one of the really interesting sort of threads through Tony's book there are the tensions within the Catholic Church in England between bishops who were frequently sort of English extraction. And who were not particularly sympathetic towards Irish Catholics, and were certainly not sympathetic to the question of language or a different language. So that Tony actually sort of teases out that thread exceptionally well, and he names names.
So it's difficult to talk about, there's the church and then there's individual priests. And you can't label them all across the board. So you can point to individual priests here in Liverpool and in Ireland who teach Irish, who are native Irish speakers, and they're very progressive. You can also identify priests who are very opposed to the Irish language. So you'll see a mixture. Minute is a large part of the jigsaw. So the dandies, as they were referred to coming out of Minute, tended to be very pro-British, conservative, don't rock the boat, don't do anything that suggests revolution or anything underhand. And Cardinal Cullen has just come back from Rome, and he's terrified of rebellion and subversive organisations and the Fenians. And that's part of it. The church wants to be on the right side of history. It wants to be respectable, and that is to be capitalistic and to be English speaking and to be proper gentlemen.
It's just a small point, but probably that's fairly important as well. I suppose the language of Mass was Latin anyway, but we are talking about hearing confession, which is important for Catholics. And to have a confessor who had the Irish language was very important, and for the population in Liverpool. But the Mass itself, because it was Latin until after the Second Vatican Council in the late 1960s, wasn't the issue, but it was sermons and in particular confession. Yeah.
Had the Catholic Church in Ireland supported the Irish language in the 19th century, the Irish language would have survived as a language of the whole and the language of religion.
Yeah, and I blame Daniel O'Connell.
Kerry people are getting
Kicking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Judith McCarthy, Commonwealth is Michigan a bag. Ken focal to Siadhail. Hello, my friends. Sorry, my Irish is small. What's your favourite words in the Irish language, or favourite sounds even?
Ooh.
Sus.
Mine is actually Bachlan. It's where you hold a child. Yeah, well, I don't think you have a word like that in English. Or if we do, I'm not sure what it is. It's only for the child. That's nice.
Gaeilge.
That
Lesson.
can have several meanings. I'd be careful with that one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the old sus, the sus more and the sus biog.
Yeah.
Garmagat.
Well, what was or is the predominant dialect in Liverpool? And do you think with the amount of people that are speaking Irish in Ireland, it'll become one dialect or still remain Munster, Connaught and Ulster?
Keough-Naughton got into this. Keough-Naughton was professor of Celtic here at the University of Liverpool, and in 1904 he was invited to give a lecture to the Gaeilge League. I don't know which branch, because there was a lot of branches, but he gave a lecture to the Liverpool Gaeilge League, and he's just back from Hungary. And his argument is that the Gaeilge League can't deal with this. It's too popular and it's too large, and you need a small group of dictators, academics, who will decide how everything is going to be spelt and pronounced. You can imagine how that went down.
You're closer to the ground than we are, Dorothy, kind of in the context of living in Ireland. What's your sense of
When I hear the Liverpool accent, I think it's more northern, but
That's an awful thing to say. But
yeah. Well, maybe that's just John Bishop, I don't know. I don't know, I mean, I'd have to do some study on it. I think it's more for me, the structures. I mean, I've heard Liverpudlians say things like, give me it, and that's a very Irish thing. You know, tor dome in Irish. But am I right? Would you say, give me it, and not think that was wrong? I've heard people say that from Liverpool. So there's things like that that I would notice that are directly from Irish. The accent, I'm not sure. The second part of your question, I don't think the dialects will die because people are very, very protective of them. They really are. And even though we've accepted the standard written Irish to an extent, well, to a large extent, I suppose, people are very much, and even in the universities where we teach, you know, I mean, we would encourage students to learn a dialect and to stick to that dialect before they then would maybe, you know, not to mix their dialects, basically, would be, you know. So yeah, I think they're still good and strong. And we have 3 dialects among the 3 of us, so it's nice.
the good one.
And we understand each other in Irish,
the
you
good,
know.
the bad, and the ugly?
You have to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, I suppose, in the context of linguistic sort of legacies, whatever, I was reading recently, again, actually, it was in preparation for this, I was looking at Tony Crowley's book, Scouse, A Social and Cultural History. And again, it's an interesting book, first of all, because I think you actually see the influence of Tony Birtle. Tony Crowley very much accepts, who's actually born here, but well-known kind of linguist, accepts kind of what Tony Birtle was saying about the presence of Irish speakers. Again, part of the way in which Tony Birtle moved the conversation on.
We need a Tony Birtle in every Irish city throughout the world.
But so in one way, kind of Tony Crowley very much kind of willing to recognise kind of the historic presence of the Irish language here. But what he's less kind of clear cut about, and this was actually the Liverpool English Dictionary that many of you will know, which came out 5 or 6 years ago. He's less clear cut about kind of the linguistic legacy of the Irish language on the form of English spoken here. And again, it's way beyond kind of my area, but I suppose one way what he's pointing to is that there seemed to be a frequently kind of a tendency to presume that the Irish language has influenced the form of English spoken here, but what Tony Crowley would argue is it's more difficult to actually document it.
So here's a question. Given the lack of documentation, why are we willing to accept there were so few Irish speakers in Liverpool, but we're willing to accept that they didn't have an influence on?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I see the point that you're, yeah.
We have time maybe for 1 or 2 more.
I just have one question. Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I had a weird experience of students, middle-class English students, coming to the classroom and talking to me about kneecap. Very weird group. So
The kneecap effect.
my question is, where do you stand on kneecap's usage of Irish? First of all, on the kneecap, and what is your what do you think is the state of the Irish language today, the way it's taught in Ireland and both in the diasporic communities? Because I've been out of Ireland a long time now, and I believe it's like a minority rights language. It's very vibrant. There seems to be so much more positive about it compared to my own, experience of it when I was growing up.
Can I just say, I taught Mowgli Bap, one of the members of NECAP. So my children did not think I was cool until, oh yeah, he was in my class, that's Nisho Carolan. And they were, you know, NECAP? The NECAP effect is real. It definitely is. There's lots of things about it that are interesting. I think a lot of what they talk about are social issues and, you know, socialism and language rights, and they put it in that framework. And certainly, there's absolutely no doubt about it, because I'm working in the university in Ireland, and yes, there's far more interest in the language. The number of people taking it are bigger. We have a lot of groups that are not doing degrees, like night classes and things like that. So there's a growing interest and a growing use of Irish in things like signage and, you know, even people choosing Irish names or using the Irish version of their names. When I was in college, if you taught Uigín, you know, so I used to say it means Viking and smile, you know, because they'd say, what's that in English? And the English version is Higgins, but it actually means Viking, you know, so I'd always give the answer, well, it's, you know, I'm a Viking. But nowadays you have an awful lot of the students who will register in Irish, they'll use their Irish name, they don't question that, you know, you can use your Irish name. They will demand what we have, you know, we have Irish language schemes in the universities and all the public bodies, but they'll demand the right to use it, you know, whereas we would have been more apologetic about asking for, do you have the form in Irish, or can I do it in Irish? Or, so yeah, you definitely see it. Sorry, I've gone on a tangent there because I was so happy with myself that I knew NECAP. But yeah, no, it definitely it has helped. And people who traditionally wouldn't have been interested in the Irish language are kind of brought along by this. And you know what, even though not everybody agrees with NECAP, even with the name, what I think, and I always think this because I write a lot about journalism, is if it causes a debate, that in itself is healthy. If you're talking about the Irish language, even to disagree with NECAP, the debate is there, and debate is always useful and always healthy.
Yeah, I think one of the other changes, and again, as somebody who's lived out of Ireland for several decades now, is just how multicultural Ireland is, and multi-ethnic and multilingual, and I think that opens up space for the Irish language. That, yes, you come up with then kind of people respond to things like, okay, there are more Polish speakers than there are Irish speakers, but at the same time, I think kind of it also triggers something in people's head that, so what if you're talking Irish on a bus? You no longer have to feel kind of self-conscious or inferior in some way, an inferiority complex, the sorts of mindsets that came through the colonial project of essentially kind of feeling kind of inferior. Those sorts of changes. The other sort of aspect of this, and this again comes from teaching Irish abroad, the part of Canada that I'm in Nova Scotia, is primarily an English-speaking area. So one of the early things, kind of, or one of the early questions I used to ask my students who were coming in to take Irish, who thought Irish was exotic, by the way, but what were their experiences learning French in schools in Nova Scotia? It sucks. The teachers are useless. What's the point of learning this? And of course, these are the sorts of things you frequently would have heard in Ireland, but where it actually kind of fits into a much stronger sort of issue, which is that within the whole revival movement, especially with the establishment of the modern Irish state, there was this ghettoization of Irish within the educational system. And one of the big failures of the state was not bringing a compulsory Irish in. It was the fact that once students left the classroom, they couldn't use the language. Yeah. You couldn't go into the 1920s version of McDonald's and order kind of a Big Mac. You couldn't go into a bank and kind of do your business there. It was this disconnect between, and of course the whiff of compulsion. But it's interesting again, just from having spent so much of my life in the university. We in the university don't talk about compulsion, we talk about requirements. You're required to take such and such a course. How you dress something up kind of it can also sort of kind of help people respond.
Listen, we better wrap up because I know that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. As a kneecap effect victim, and in regards to like the multicultural aspect of the language and stuff like that, what does this mean for like the future? Like, one of my friends is half Jamaican and lives in Manchester, never been to Ireland in his life till last year, and is like nearly fluent now because of kneecap. So like,
Well, it's because of my teaching.
he runs a Mowgli Bap fan account. But like, what does this mean for us? Like, what does this mean for like our children now? Like, not my child, but you know what I mean? Like, when people my age go on to have children, like, what does that mean for Liverpool? Like, will we see it being taught in schools? Maybe not now, but in the future. Like, what? Do you have any thoughts on that?
There's a problem with kneecap in that the movie's great, everything's great. We've spent 20, 30 years telling the unionists that they have nothing to fear from the Irish language. Kneecap have torn that script up.
I don't know, have they? I don't know, have they? It's not. Yeah,
I
but
think
I mean,
they have
again, it's
cross-cultural appeal, actually.
Yeah, I think it does, and I
They
think
subvert everything in a way.
Yeah.
So which includes kind of
they're
nationalism
children
or
of the
republicanism.
Troubles, so they are. That's
Yeah.
what they call it themselves. I think, I'm very positive about the language. I mean, I think, for example, when my son is 22, I remember we went to, have him registered after he was born or whatever you have to do, and we wanted to do it in Irish, and the people came out, "We're the troublemakers," and I remember going, why am I a troublemaker? But now that wouldn't happen, and people would not accept it happening. So I am very positive about it. I mean, I'm not naive either, because I mean we're long enough on this block to know that there are cycles. But I think at the moment it is very positive. I think people are very interested in the language, and I think it's in a lot better situation than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, absolutely.
Louis de Poyer has made the point that this is what it was like in 1904, 1905. That
Yeah.
it was cool to go to
Yeah,
Irish language
absolutely.
classes. It
Yeah.
was cool to go to Gaeilge's.
Yeah.
This is what it was like back in the day.
Yeah, I do think so. I sometimes think it's a little bit like the revival period 100 years later. Yeah.
Okay, please join us outside for a wine reception, and join me in thanking our speakers one last time.